Oh, hello. Welcome back. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Um, this is a spin-off of my previous video number 5 where I talked about the levels of government and the branches of government and how they influence each other when they're doing public policy. So I wanted to go ahead and go into more detail and specifics with that regard real quick, and then also bring in the states, because what I'm about to explain is the uh, the methods of federalism as we know it. So let's go and just look at this. Um, as my teacher says, federalism. So TM is Budne. So there are two types of federalism. There's what we call dual federalism and cooperative federalism. The way Janda explains it in his book, The Challenge of Democracy, is think of federalism as a cake. You know, because we love government so much, it's all sweet and everything. So, dual federalism is a layer cake. It has the national government on top and the state and local governments on the bottom. They are separate, clearly defined. That is what dual federalism is. It states that the national governments and the state governments, through the Constitution's specifications, clearly separates and differentiates these levels of government. Okay? And I'm talking about the levels right now, not the branches, because the branches is only talking about the national government. So when we look at the levels of government, there can be that dual federalism or cooperative federalism. Think of a marble cake, where all the cake batter is mixed together of the two flavors. Well, state and federal governments' roles and activities are mixed together at all different levels. The federal government has a role, it's that whole synonymous thing. The national government has a role in state issues. State governments might have a role in national issues. Whatever. But that's cooperative federalism. So it's pretty straightforward. Just think of layer cake and marble cake. Alright, so we briefly went over sort of a look into policy making and how each of the branches have their own separation of powers, such as the legislative making the laws, executive executing, etc., and the checks and balances, each having a role on the other branches to make sure no branch gets too powerful. Well, when the national government does work together, typically this is Congress doing it, Congress can implement policies that influence things at the state levels. And there's 3 ways that Congress, the national government, does this. I'm about to explain how the national government influences state governments and maybe gets into their issues. So there's grant and aid, which is when the national government gives money through grants to the different levels, either the state or even local governments, and it does it in 2 different ways, through either block grants or categorical grants. Block grants have no general purpose. They're essentially free money, and this is how the majority of the grants and aid are distributed. They're just free money for the state governments or whatever institutions to do whatever they want with it. Categorical grants have a particular purpose, and that's why they're much smaller, because each categorical grant is for a particular purpose, a particular event, issue, policy initiative, whatever. So then the categorical grant is breaks up into 2 different types. There's formula categorical grants and project categorical grants. Formula grants are essentially if a government is trying to get a categorical grant for, let's say, highway funding, then every time take the number of drunk driving accidents in that state and put it into a formula, and it would be an inverse, because the fewer accidents, the more money they would get rewarded for it. Plug that into a formula and you get a guaranteed amount. Okay, so it actually goes into a formula. But with the project grant, it's merit based. It's based off competition, where states compete against other states, institutions compete against other institutions for the categorical grant. And usually the project grants are worth more money than the formula grants. So project is more competitive, formula is guaranteed through a formula. The second way, and I know I'm going over 5 minutes, but oh well. The second way that the national government can influence state policies is through what we call coercive federalism, excuse me. And that's where the national government feels through acts of Congress that it can mandate or restrict what state governments can or cannot do. We'll get into this a little bit later with freedom of and freedom from, and civil freedoms versus civil liberties. But basically, it's the same type of idea, where the national government can mandate, for example, public accommodations. National government, through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, mandated that the states require that all public places of public accommodation allow for all people of all races to be entered into it, to gain access to it, like a movie theater. So it's not the national government implementing all that policy, it's implementing the policy through the states. And that's through mandates, and this is the coercive federalism. The second way is through restraints. And for example, that could be something, they usually do it with environmental regulations. The national government wants to put standards by region, and it goes through the states. For the states, it requires the states to have restraints on businesses. It happens in a lot of other federal systems in European socialist countries. Not quite the United States yet, but it has been proposed, and it happens in some places, especially in particular cities. This would be a particular restraint where it's not the national government implementing policy through the states, but actually the national government implementing policy through the city and municipal governments. Environmental regulations through restraints on maybe CO2 emissions. The last way the national government can deal with implement policy through the states is what we call preemption, which is where the national government just assumes total responsibility for the matter. So instead of actually doing the policy through the state and local governments, it just takes responsibility and does it for themselves. And preemption is sort of the opposite of states' rights, where states have their own jurisdiction on their own issues through the 10th Amendment, which we'll get to later also. We're going to get to a lot of stuff. So preemption is sort of like the opposite of states' rights. So that's 7 minutes and 40 seconds. Sorry.